In Front of Ira, pilot 1, take 1. Welcome to In Front of Ira.
We're Sabrina.
And Torsten.
Two historians.
And friends.
And lovers.
Of romantic comedies.
And this is the podcast in which we answer the age-old question.
Will they or won't they?
Is it or isn't it a romantic comedy?
Technically, that's two questions.
I can do this with you right now.
Okay, whatever. Sabrina, why are we, two historians, doing a podcast about romantic comedies of all things possible to do a podcast about?
Well, I think first off is that we love them.
That is fair.
The solid start. You have notes on this, so you can do the formal part.
This is how it's going to be.
Yeah. You're the one with the notes. I'm here for the food.
It's very limited selection.
Yeah, it's tap water. Amazing. That was a trick.
Yeah, so we love them. Fair, completely fair. And I feel like they're not appreciated as cultural products just quite as much as we would like them to be for what they are. And I think the second reason is, why would you look at romantic comedies as a historian? And for me, this kind of all came together when I read an interview with Meg Ryan, because she did a new romantic comedy. It's a whole big thing.
With David Duchovny.
With David Duchovny. So that's definitely one that goes on the list. Yeah. And she said, Nora Ephron used to say about rom-coms that they were really a secretly incredible delivery system to comment on the times. And I think that's really true for us. We are going to be looking at romantic comedies from different ages. We are mostly going to be looking at American romantic comedies. We're Americanists, spoiler. So that's mostly going to be what we're looking at, but not exclusively.
There's some British ones as well, especially because of Richard Curtis, and they're increasingly transnational as well.
I mean, that's a whole question. What is the genre? Is it different in different places? And like all of that is going to come up.
We're not going to do Bollywood just because we're just not subject matter experts.
I think we might get an expert or two on.
We also don't do German ones, even though from Germany, at least there's nothing that would immediately come to mind. But that is also an industry
all of
problem.
That is potentially in the future or potentially not. And so I recently rewatched, or actually watched the whole thing for the first time, Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr., because like this is kind of a classic Buster Keaton movie that you see in clips all the time, and it just showed up on one of the streaming services, and I just clicked and I watched the whole thing through. And at some point, I basically just stopped and went, wait, is this a romantic comedy? And I don't seem to be the only one, because I was obviously researching this. And people seem to agree that 1924, which is the year in which Sherlock Jr. was released, but also Girl Shy was released, is kind of the year in which romantic comedies started in Hollywood. So in 2024, we're going to have 100 years of romantic comedies. That is certainly enough time to look back and see how they developed and how they changed. So what I was thinking about is, okay, so if we assume, and historians like to do that, we periodize things. So let's just say 1924, and then we talk for a very long time whether that's actually true and why not.
We're still in the long 70s.
We are still in the long 19th century, actually. And we will look at comedies from all of these years, and there are kind of really important ones in almost every decade. You have in 1934, It Happened One Night, which is kind of one of those classics that gets talked about as initiating really the Hollywood romantic comedy. You have a lot of these 1930s, 1940s, fast-talking comedy
Yeah, I think
classics.
the Screwball. I don't know if it's called Screwball yet in the 40s, but definitely in the 60s.
But definitely, we're kind of like, this is kind
of like, this is the classic.
yeah, His Girl Friday
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Bringing Up Baby is something that we could mention here. And you can clearly see the mores of the time and what matters for a time, like what supposedly relationships are supposed to be at the time in these. You move into the 1940s, and you have obviously The Shop Around the Corner, inspiring kind of arguably the essential Nora Ephron rom-com, if we treat When Harry Met Sally as more of a collaboration, whatever. I mean, it's arguable. Like 70 years later, 60 years later, The Apartment and Sabrina, even the movie would be something to talk about.
Sour about the fact that the original Sabrina is pretty good, and then they made a remake with Harrison Ford, and that's so bad. I tried watching it twice. I stopped twice.
It has this very strange scene where he jumps the Concorde to beat her, like to go to, or something. Like it's just one of those things.
I don't even make it that. I don't know why that's that.
We're gonna have to do both of them at some point. But the original is pretty good. You have Breakfast at Tiffany's, which arguably is a rom-com. You have another breakfast in the 70s. You have Breakfast in the Park. Torsten from editing here. Yes, I know, it's Barefoot in the Park. I'm sorry. Which is, to my mind, one of those movies that at some point just popped up on TV, and I started watching it and I couldn't stop. I'm like, wow, this is really compelling.
Woody Allen comes in, and I mean, arguably he's also one of the like founders of the genre and very, very important, and gets copied all the time. And I think we'll have to make a decision about what to do with him, because he's Woody Allen, and he's, for very good reasons, very problematic. So we'll see if we get around him or not. I mean, I think we'll mention him. I don't need to necessarily sit down and do any haul, even though we'll see.
We'll see how we treat that. We're definitely not going to ignore the effect that it had on the genre, which with Nora Ephron really. This is why Nora Ephron, this is why our podcast title comes from When Harry Met Sally. This is why we're both huge Nora Ephron fans. She is the center of all of this 1980s plus kind of rom-com standard. You have a lot of rom-coms in the 1980s, which I've heard referred to as high concept rom-coms. You have something like Coming to America or Romancing the Stone, which you wouldn't immediately think of that's a rom-com. Like one of them is kind of fish out of water comedy. The other is more of a action movie. But at heart, they're also romantic comedies. They're funny and they're romantic, which seems to be like a pretty good measure of what is a rom-com. And then in the 1990s, every big Hollywood rom-com has either Tom Hanks or Meg Ryan, potentially both.
It's still Nora Ephron, and then it's Richard Curtis in the UK. And I think, because Richard Curtis becomes that big, and you have things like Notting Hill, like there's always a transnational angle to it, because Julia Roberts, obviously. And then she also makes a ton more. I mean, she obviously does Pretty Woman before. Then you have people like Gary Marshall, and suddenly it's like it's a wider field. But then also, remarkably, after like the end of the 90s, rom-coms, they don't necessarily disappear, but there's sort of a weird wave of like, there's a lot of them coming out, but none of them are actually like what we would call good, I think. And that sort of taints the genre, I think. And now we're like 20 years after, we're at a point where everyone just wants more rom-coms to come out. And apparently the studios are no longer interested in doing that. And I think there's larger industry questions we'll come back to, because a lot of our examples are from between the 80s and now, and like what changed and what happened to the genre, I think. And it's necessarily also a question of like what happens to the industry, what happens to Hollywood in the meantime. Why does a mid-budget film, which usually is a rom-com, no longer get made the same way? And now why are all the rom-coms essentially Hallmark movies that are like on the lower end of the spectrum? And they often, I think, have people that have a lot of talent in them, but like, you know, the writing is not the focus of them, which is like odd because I think like rom-coms only work when the writing works, which is why Nora Ephron was.
Yeah, there's also I was reading up on this phenomenon of the Hallmark movie because I was wondering, wait, the rom-com kind of goes away 2000s, doesn't become that important as a studio movie anymore. The Hallmark channel starts right around that time as a channel kind of rebranded from something else, and they start turning out these Hallmark movies, and I think that's just kind of where that genre goes for a very long time. And then with the start of streaming, and especially in the last couple of years, they seem to understand that these Hallmark movies are popular, and maybe what we can do is do our own version. And you get these kind of reinvigorated rom-coms on things like Netflix.
Yeah. Netflix does essentially their own. Like, they do a lot of Christmas. Yeah. So they do the Hallmark. I mean, the Hallmark, I think, has branched out into, like, fall as well. But mostly, I mean, people connect it to Christmas. And this is when people are also looking forward to watching them. And they usually don't even care if they're not that good. But I think the takeaway is people are so starved for this genre, they're willing to watch something that is necessarily not that good. And I mean, it's like rom-coms can always be formulaic. That doesn't make them bad. It's just mostly the quality of the writing. Like, everyone knows where the Nora Ephron movie will go. That's not where the twist is. Everyone knows they will get together in the end, but you do want to find out how. But mostly you're along for the ride. Like, you want to be entertained as it's happening. You don't care if it's sometimes very unrealistic. Either this is part of the, like, all of this Hallmark is doing right. I just think they're not necessarily investing in the right things. But we might still end up doing Hallmark.
I think there's probably a few gems that we haven't discovered.
Yeah,
which
I'm
also,
sure. And I mean, they started to diversify, which I think was the important. Or Netflix also jumped on the bandwagon of like, and a lot more queer romantic comedies got made because of that. And they're also not the best films ever made, but the fact that they are out there compared to like 10 years ago even is a step. So I think
that's the other thing that the rom-com genre for the longest time in Hollywood is basically exclusively white, and it is exclusively straight.
Yeah.
And you get inklings of that changing in the 1970s, and then kind of again like this wave of black romantic comedies in the 90s waiting to exhale, that kind of thing. And then obviously with changing general societal attitudes, which make it kind of okay for commercial enterprises to show queer love stories, and all of them suddenly appear also with the changed production, with the changed distribution, which you don't have to get people to buy a ticket for this one thing, and they may not do that, but they're paying for their subscription anyway, and they might just click in. So that's a whole aspect of it as well.
I think it's still funny that there haven't been that many big rom-coms, because the few times they were made by bigger studios in the last few years, they were wildly successful, especially also when they weren't exclusively white or like cis-heteronormative, because something like Crazy Rich Asians, which really is kind of a rom-com, very much so, I mean, obviously made money for other reasons, but also because it was one. And I don't know why they don't, and I mean, there's the question of like the only big studio rom-com with like a queer couple was Bros, and that had very mixed reviews. I think we're going to definitely do that because I want to. Yeah. But yeah, I think there's also that scapegoat thing of like, well, you know, that one didn't do as well as we wanted it to, so it must be the problem that nobody wants to see gay people. I'm like, you know, that's not the problem. Anyway, yeah, that's why
so that, dear audience, is why we have decided to spend our time discussing romantic comedy movies. Ideally in a setup like this where we're both in the same room, but realistically, because we live in different cities and then we also work in different cities from the cities that we live in. So the likelihood of us finding ourselves in the same place is not very high, but we're going to continue this. We're going to be doing this in person. We're going to be doing it over FaceTime calls and Zoom and whatever it takes. And yeah, so we will drop our first season this Meg Ryan fall, so watch out for that. It's going to be 4 episodes that we've already recorded, that we already have, and that we're going to, have you hopefully like as much as we like them, and hopefully like them as much as we like watching these movies. And then we are going to record more, and we are going to, well, put more out there, because that's how podcasts apparently work.
That's how podcasts work. And I think the thing is, we're doing this because we enjoy doing it, and if 5 people listen to it, that's fine with us. If it's 500, that's even better. But like we will probably keep making it, even if there's 5 of you. So that's fine.
Yeah. So the 5 of you, thank you for listening, and let us know what constitutes a rom-com for you, and perhaps which ones we should be doing next. We can't guarantee it'll line up exactly according to wishes, but we're definitely going to try.
Yeah. And I think we're trying to keep a sort of mix within a season of like 4 to 5 episodes in terms of like the years it's from, and like if it's a classic or more of a like, one where we can actually discuss, is this a rom-com or not? Because that's also something we're trying to do here in terms of like trying to define the genre a bit, and then step out of the boxes, I guess. And that's it. And of course, we're going to start with When Harry Met Sally, because I think that's what it always comes back to for us. And it's seemingly what it comes back to for everyone who's done a romantic comedy since. It's the most referenced one, I'd say. And like a lot of people are trying to emulate what Rob Reiner and Nora Ephron did with When Harry Met Sally, and what Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan did on screen. So.
And we're going to do that in front of all the world and in front of Ira.